Like it should be on the Zoom controls, Lenka. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh,
Hey.
Oh, okay, got it. Thank you.
Nice.
Okay, so let me know if you can hear and see it okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, so it gives you a good idea of like the process and how many people these donors go through up until it gets to the recipient. I'm just going to share my screen again and start my PowerPoint. You're able to see that okay?
Yeah, you betcha.
Okay, so these are a couple of recipients: Lindsay, who is a heart recipient, Paul, a liver recipient, and Darby, a lung recipient. Darby was actually in the ICU on life support. He only had a few days to live. He ended up getting a life-saving organ, getting a double lung transplant, and he was suffering from cystic fibrosis. So since he's had his double lung, he lives on the island, he has a family now, and he's able to enjoy life with his daughter because of this life-saving organ. So here in BC, we oversee all aspects of organ donation and transplant across BC and manage the BC Organ Donor Registry. So anytime you register, we're part of that process. So when we get calls, we look up people's registration. So it is important to register and have that conversation. But we oversee all transplant in BC. So we don't have our stats quite ready for 2020, but 2019, we had a couple record breakers. So we broke the record for the amount of hearts we were able to transplant. We transplanted 31 hearts, 46 lungs, 68 livers, and 331 kidneys, totaling to 480 lives saved. And then there was also deceased donation as well as living, which I'll get to. And then the other record breaker was the amount of referrals that the hospital called in to us. So BC Transplant oversees all solid organ donation, so heart, lungs, liver, pancreas, islets, and kidneys, whereas the eye bank oversees corneas and sclera. So there's two types of donation. There's what's called living donation and deceased donation. So with living donation, this is, there's no deceased, so somebody who's able to donate to either their family member, they're either going to be an anonymous donor or a paired exchange. So if my husband needed a kidney and I wasn't a match, but I was a match for somebody else who needed a kidney and they were a match for my husband, that's a paired exchange. And so many medical shows have gone through this kind of, I think Grey's Anatomy did a whole episode on this, on these paired exchange. And I think we've done up to 6 here in BC. And then also livers can be living donation. So livers are a little bit more fragile. So we only do direct to family member or friends. There's no anonymous donation just because livers tend to bleed and there's more complications. The other type of donation is deceased donation. So this is where there's been a tragic event, something's happened, and that person's either neurologically brain dead, and then we're able to donate heart, lungs, liver, pancreas, or the islet cells for the pancreas, which help diabetics, kidneys, and eyes. Or they've had some sort of event where their brain, they still have blood flow to the brain, but they're not going to make any kind of meaningful recovery. So the family has decided to move to palliation, to comfort care. So then with those types of donation, we take them off the life support, let them pass, and then we're able to bring them to the OR. And with that type of donation, we can do liver, lungs, kidneys, pancreas for the islet cells, again for diabetics, and eyes. So because we're waiting for the heart to stop, we don't take hearts with our donation after cardiocirculatory death. So part of this process, once we talk to families and let them know kind of what the process is like, because what the general public thinks donation is as opposed to how it actually works out is very different. So once we do consent with the family and they kind of have a good understanding of what donation looks like, then we pull this red blood box. In this red blood box, there's about 20 tubes. And these tubes are how we start the whole process. So some of these tubes are going to go to the CDC, and there they're going to test for infectious diseases. So they test for HIV, hepatitis, syphilis. So they do all our infectious disease testing. And then the rest of the blood is going to go to VGH, to Vancouver General Hospital, where they're to the immunology lab, which is where Lenka works, where they're going to start the process of matching to recipients. So how do we find recipients? How are they chosen? It's about the match. So first we need to match blood type, size. Size is important because, you know, somebody who's 6'2", their lungs are not going to fit in me, who's only 5'2". So size really does matter. Who's most urgent on the list? Who is the sickest? Who's been waiting the longest on the list? Also, geography matters. So cold ischemic time is when the blood is stopped flowing through the organ. And so we have a time limit. So heart and lungs are very sensitive. They can't be perfused for just 4 to 6 hours. So how far lungs and hearts can go is really, we only offer up to Ontario. Livers are a little bit more resilient, so 8 to 12 hours. Kidneys, 8 to 24 hours, and pancreas, 6 to 8 hours. And what's interesting here is that before COVID, if Alaska had a donor, they would offer to the Seattle area, and then they would offer to us because those organs can't go really any further than Washington. So we would get a lot of offers from Alaska because just geographically, they can't go anywhere else. When we try to find matches, we're going to look here in BC first. And then if we can't find suitable recipients, we're going to make our way east. So then we're going to offer to Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, Quebec. And that's kind of where we stop, is at Quebec. Because we want to make the most of these gifts. save as many lives as we can. If we can't find any matches within Canada, then we're gonna start offering to UNOS, which is the states.
Are all the organs transported differently? Like, is there different methods for transporting depending on the organ?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It really depends on where the recipient is, where the organ's going. So the first to come out is the heart and lungs. So as soon as those come out, they're gone. So they go in their own taxi, their own ambulance to either VGH or St. Paul's Hospital, or out of province teams will come into the OR. Like, say we couldn't find a recipient in BC for the heart, but we found one in Alberta. Well, the Alberta team will have their own plane ready and waiting. They're going to come to our OR, and as soon as that heart is recovered, they're going to jump in the plane, and they're also talking to their OR in Alberta to get that recipient set up and open. So when they hit the ground, they're going to the hospital, and that heart is getting as little cold time as possible. And then the next thing to come out is the below diaphragm organs. So that's the pancreas, liver, and kidneys. So they are all, as they come out, they get sent off depending on where they're going, because we want as little ischemic, cold ischemic time as possible, because the organ graft function is going to take a lot better with the littlest time possible. So also we have some sharing agreements, some national agreements in Canada. So we have one national agreement for hearts and livers. So these are the sickest patients who are in ICU, who are only going to live for the next couple of days. So they get priority. So even if we have a match here in BC, if somebody is sick in Alberta and they're going to pass in the next couple of days, then they get priority, because we're trying to save as many people as possible. The other national sharing agreement we have is for kidneys. So sometimes people have sensitizing events, and so they're more likely to reject an organ. So they're called highly sensitized patients. And so if we can match one kidney with a highly sensitized patient in BC or in Canada, then one kidney would stay here in BC and the other one's going to go to that patient, because we're trying to, otherwise their likelihood of finding a match is very slim. The other agreement we have is when we can't find suitable recipients in Canada, then we're going to offer to the United States. And same with them. If they can't find any recipients geographically within their area, then they offer to us. So this is an example of our national organ sharing wait list. So in the red, you can see this is where this recipient is. So this first one is in Quebec. The blue is what type of organ, so a heart. And then it tells us kind of where they are. A 4 is a very sick patient, so they have priority over everyone else. And then the red box tells us their organ group, and the green box kind of gives us some parameters to work within. Sometimes these are young children, so the size matters. Sometimes they need an exact match, so they're not going to take any blood groups outside of their own. So we look through this first before we offer locally. So, and this is the highly sensitized kidneys. So these are people with, it's called PRA, so panel reactive antibodies that are 95% and greater. So they have a lot of antibodies, so their likelihood of rejection is very high. So if we can find a match, then one of the kidneys, because we have 2, one would stay here in BC to help somebody locally, and the other one would go to these highly sensitized patients. So how do we find a match? So immunology, and Dr. Lenka might be able to better talk about this, but they have all the recipients on the wait list, all have their blood taken and is inputted into their system. So when we take that red blood box, we send it to immunology and they do a virtual cross match. So they, through the computer, they're looking to see if there's any rejection with the recipients and then the donor. So once we do a virtual cross match, we talk to our transplant centers and come up with some names, and we do an actual cross match. So where they're cross matching the donor's blood with the recipients to see if there's anything that comes up that would make them reject that organ. And from there, we decide which recipients are going to get these organs. So this is, feel free not to look if you don't like, but this is part of the recovery surgery. So this is a heart that's been recovered. You can see the valve in the second picture. These are lungs that have been recovered, a liver, kidneys, pancreas. So these are lungs. Sometimes patients develop kind of pneumonia or bugs in their lungs, but we still want to make the most of these lungs and potentially transplant them. So in the last 2 years, VGH has gotten this machine called ex vivo. It's like an incubator for lungs. So what happens is if the lungs can't be transplanted because there's something growing in them, we can put them in this ex vivo machine. We can do CT scans, we can do x-rays, we can give high dose steroids, we can give antibiotics, and we can give really high doses of these because there's no other organs that they're gonna affect. And we can even take a camera and go into these lungs and try and clean them up a little bit. And they'll stay in this machine for about 4 to 6 hours. And then we try to transplant them again. So we try to kind of turn them around quickly, clean them up so that they are potentially worth transplanting. And so this is Dr. Yi, who is our transplanting lung surgeon. And they were just kind of testing out the machine here at VGH. So I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll let Lenka describe more of the immunology and from her perspective.
Okay, well, let me see.
I got a question for you, Bobby.
Yeah.
You mentioned before that someone that had cystic fibrosis had the lungs transplant, right? And that's a genetic disease. So would that be like once the lungs are transplanted or has new lungs in there, is that gone? Is that condition gone?
No, they still have cystic fibrosis. They're still going to have to take their medications and their anti-rejections and do all the things they had to do. But the cystic fibrosis destroyed their old lungs, right? So they might be able to keep these lungs for another 10 years, but it gives them an additional 10 years. And so I don't know if you saw on my screen here, I'll share again. This is Eva. Eva had a double lung transplant in the 90s. She also had cystic fibrosis. She has a beautiful documentary that's worth watching. It's called 65 Red Roses. And this documentary goes from when she gets her pager, she's put on the wait list, what it's like to be on the wait list when she finally gets the calls and gets her double lung transplant, and what she does with it afterwards. It's a very beautiful documentary. And the reason it's called 65 Red Roses is because as a child, she couldn't say cystic fibrosis. So that's what she called her disease, was 65 Red Roses.
I was going to say, it's interesting too. I know I said I was going to observe, but we work with a lot of volunteers who are people who have had transplants. And we know one woman who we worked with for many years, her name's Margaret. She lives in North Vancouver. She's had her lung transplant. She had cystic fibrosis. And so she came to the point where she needed a lung transplant. She's had her lung transplant now for 20 years. Like it's around that anyways. And to the point where actually she had a kidney transplant last year because the medication you have to continue to take when you have been transplanted has impacted her kidney function. So she ended up getting a kidney transplant as well, but she's still doing really well. It's pretty amazing how the range of time that people can have with a new organ. Sadly, Eva has passed away because she got listed for a second lung transplant, and unfortunately there was no donor in time. So she had her lungs were much shorter, but it's just interesting. It's quite a range, but it's always more years of life that they wouldn't otherwise have had.
Right. Oh, we got a question back here. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Hi. I was wondering, so say like if I was a donor and then I died of old age, would my heart or whatever still be usable if I died of old age?
Like if you were elderly and passed?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a great question. And our criteria is always changing. Like I think it was either last year or the year before, we took a 73-year-old's lungs. So it really depends who's on the wait list and how sick they are. Sometimes they'll use organs as a bridging till they get a better organ as well. So, I think sometimes somebody might be too old, but you never know until you talk to the transplant programs, because we don't know who's on the recipient end. So it really all depends on who's on the recipient end and how sick.
And a bunch of years ago, actually, we had a regifted heart. So it was given to somebody, and then like a day or so they passed away, but it was regifted. So it does happen.
Yeah.
So that heart would have ended up in 3 people. Is that what happened?
That's right. Correct.
Huh. Wow. Cool. Any other questions? No. I guess one question I had just recently, Grace, what do you know what province that was? We've been talking about BC Transplant lately for the past couple of weeks at the school, and kind of been trying to pump it up a little bit in our social media. And one of the students had heard on the radio that there's a province now that is making it an opt-out, that you have to that you're automatically included in organ donation, but it's like you have to opt out if you don't want to be part of it.
I think it was Ontario.
Is that something that BC is hoping to do, or is that where are we as far as?
I hope they do, actually, because a lot of European countries have done this already.
Yeah, so sorry, Bobby, I wasn't sure if you were
No, I'm happy for you too, because you probably are more knowledgeable in this than me.
Yeah, so it was Nova Scotia, and they're the first jurisdiction in all of North America that have it, but there's lots of other, like Lenka said, in Europe, and Spain is really well known for having a deemed consent legislation. So the thing is, I think that people who work in organ donation would say that it's not like a silver bullet. It's not the thing that's going to increase organ donation alone. Nova Scotia, for example, brought in a bunch of other programs and initiatives to improve donation, primarily around having staff like Bobby who work in hospitals, who talk to families, who do, and education with critical care, so staff in emergency rooms and intensive care units to raise awareness and refer donors. So there's a lot of other stuff that goes along with that that can make that kind of legislation successful. And you really have to have people accept it, right? Like, I think that Brazil in the 90s or early 2000s, they introduced this kind of legislation, and they had so many people register no that they actually had to rescind and pause the legislation, because there's so many people who don't like the idea of, you can just take my body and do what you want with it, right? Like that's so it really has to have a lot of acceptance and understanding and awareness around organ donation and what it means for a place to accept it. Not to say that it wouldn't be successful here, I think.
Well, I think as soon as you're willing to accept an organ to save your life, you should be able to,
Totally. I agree.
It's interesting that you say that, because our medical director, I had a conversation with him, and in Korea, they are also the same, like you're presumed an organ donor. And in Korea, you have to sign up to not be an organ donor. And if you do, then if you ever need an organ, you're put at the bottom of the list.
Oh, wow.
That sounds fair.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah, this was Mark Malosh that was talking to me about this.
Okay, Lenka, so we'll turn it to you for a bit.
I can share my screen here. Oh, shoot.
We'll take more questions after too.
You guys see my PowerPoint?
Yeah, you bet.
Okay, great. All right, so my part of the conversation is going to be maybe more boring, But so this is what we deal with. So we deal with human leukocyte antigens, the HLA. This is the nitty gritty of things. And where it resides is on the chromosome 6. And it's actually the most polygenic and polymorphic part of your genome. So it has, and it's because of the class 1 and class 2 antigens. So like the buildup of your immune system. So this is where it resides, and this is where we go for when we're testing for everything. And so the focus of our lab in the HLA lab is we do, half of it is doing stem cell transplant, bone marrow transplantations for neoplastic disorders, obviously lymphomas and leukemias, acute leukemias especially, multiple myeloma, myelodysplastic syndromes, and then other non-neoplastic disorders, more to do with children, aplastic anemias, autoimmune diseases, and such. And then
sorry,
we also do
detected on just one gene. You're looking at one gene, and from that one gene, you can find these diseases or these.
Oh no, we're looking at like 11 genes.
Oh, okay.
So very many genes. But yes, there are certain genes that predispose you to autoimmune diseases, and that is actually something that we do look at. And I've got it. Next slide. So there are certain HLA disease associations, and they're something that people don't really know, are not very familiar with, is ankylosing spondylitis, celiac disease. So we test for that a lot. Narcolepsy, which I have the gene predisposed to it, and Behçet's disease, which I also have, but it doesn't mean you're going to get it. It just means you're predisposed to it. And rheumatoid arthritis, and then more genes of like adverse drug reactions, like drug reactions to carbamazepine, allopurinol, and such. So that is the other side of the other part of our lab. And then I put in this picture. Who knows who this is?
Anyone?
Huh?
Oh, we got someone said Thomas Jefferson, but it might be in the wrong class.
No. We keep going. Nope.
Did we do that? Banfield? We got crickets.
Crickets? Oh, you got crickets. Gregor Mendel.
Oh, Mendel.
A peas.
The pea guy, yeah.
Pea guy. So this is the the start of genetics, and incredibly important to our field is genetics. And he was actually born in the city I was born in. So that's where I'm from. So, okay. So this is the inheritance of, so as you asked, there are a number of genes in HLA genome, right around that specific part of chromosome 6. And you tend to inherit them, not individually, like yellow or green, like a pea, but like a haplotype. So you inherit them, and so it goes in families. And then, so this is basically showing this exact thing. So the majority of the time, you'll inherit the entire block of your HLA genes. Once in a while, there is a crossover, and then you will, inherit something that's a little bit different. But majority of the time, it's inherited as a block. And so, what do I got? So, I think most people know this. So if you have a graft given from your own tissue back to yourself, it'll be fine. You're not going to reject it. And also if it's going to be from a genetically identical sibling or clone, in mice this becomes more important.
So that would be like a bone graft or a skin graft or something like
yeah,
that? Yeah,
exactly. And then an allograft, which is basically an individual that is quite different from you. It's not of the same, not of the same family or species, that tends to be rejected. So that's just the foundation of autoimmune, not autoimmune, sorry, rejection. So this is a picture from Science and Nature magazines in 2003, which at this time, the human genome, it took like 10 or more years to get a draft of the human genome at this point. We can do it much, much faster now. And so this is where our lab is like just much, much faster at being able to do things. And so now basically it looks like this. It's like you could get your children to do it. You get a little tablet, you get your children doing it. It's all, it's all very simple. So this is where we're at. And I'm not saying it's that simple, but because the interpretation isn't, especially in our part of the genome. Let's see. Yeah, so that's basically it.
Any questions? I guess one question I would have would be like, so it looks like it's improved so much in our ability to kind of to analyze. What would be the next big breakthrough? What would be, looking like, is there other organs that potentially could be, we could eventually figure out how to use organ donation, or some organs just too complex, or they get rejected?
There are certain organs that tend to get rejected more. Lungs do. So, I mean, basically the ones that we do are kidney, heart, lung. Pancreas is not very common, but anything that's enclosed and it's sterile tends to function much better.
I have a question. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say a lung, it's exposed, like it just has just so many more immune cells in it because it's exposed to the environment. So it's tends to get more rejection.
So my question, so when I was talking to you guys about how we do a virtual where we're looking at the recipient's blood and then the donor and seeing if there's any interaction, and then we actually do the flow cytometry where we're actually mixing the donor and the recipient's blood. Part of that, we only do that for heart, livers, pancreas, and kidneys, but we don't do it for livers. Dr. Lincoln, do you mind explaining?
Sure, that is true. But you know what? We should be. Because even just within the last week, we had a request for looking at antibodies in a liver transplant donor. So the history behind this is that livers tend to just be more resilient. They tend to not be as prone to rejection, but that doesn't mean they're not at all. So I think they are, and I think we're going to go move in that place. But that is the liver program, that they just have that mindset that it's immunology is not important.
I had mentioned to Bobby that one of our other guests that we've had in this class was Summer Heidi, and she's I think she was from Saskatchewan, and she was on CBC, and I ended up contacting her, and she had she got her stomach removed. She had in her family a really aggressive gene for this rare type of stomach cancer. And so she had like an 87% chance of getting it. So she made the choice to have her stomach removed. And she joined us and talked all about that whole process and where it was on the gene. And then I guess, where are we as far as being able to transplant things like a stomach? Or is that just too complex with the, with the acids and things?
That's a very good question. I've never thought about stomachs. I think that would be a very, like, a bit of a tricky one. Yeah, you've got me stumped there. Stomach. But I mean, other things have been transplanted that are kind of unusual.
Yeah. If you were, I guess maybe if you were to project like 10 years in the future, where do you think we'll be? Where do you think, like, as the technology's ramping up and changing, like, what's the kind of, is there an end game? Is there like a, that the black box of transplant, the holy grail that once we figure that out, then we can transplant all these different things?
Well, I'm hoping that we'll be able to grow organs elsewhere, like just have absolute access to organs that are maybe not necessarily from deceased donors.
Like maybe even growing your own organ?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's where I would like things to go.
Cool. And I guess that would have to be something with stem cells and figuring out how to do
Yeah,
that.
yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
I think that's where things should go.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think that, I mean, this is not maybe genetically the science, but what I've also understand in terms of transplant overall, like probably like just even medications for managing post-transplant and developments in pharmaceuticals that will improve like rejection, improve all of those kind of things. It's another sort of area from, I don't know of any research specifically here, but certainly that's something that I think will help.
The medications
transform.
are actually quite good at preventing rejection right now. They're incredibly good. So I don't think that's the lack.
Is there lots of funding to help support people try to make advancements?
Oh, we can always,
More.
be happy with more funding.
And Dr. Lenka, when we do that flow cross match, when we're actually cross matching the donor blood with the recipient, and we see what kind of interactions, is that how they determine what type of anti-rejection and the level of anti-rejection that the recipient will need?
Well, you know what, if at that point there is a positive cross match, which is above our threshold of what we determine positive, it'll be counterindicated.
Okay.
To go against. If it's below that, and they might have even had historical antibodies, then we look at the historical antibodies and say there's just, there's something you have to be cautious about, and they'll give extra immunosuppression.
And what I found interesting is all the different things that could make you sensitized. Like I never realized that being pregnant and having a baby will add to your sensitivity.
Definitely. Oh yeah. So the main sensitizing events are, so obviously a previous transplant, a transfusion before, and pregnancy, because you're exposed to the paternal antigens. And a woman will develop antigens towards the paternal antigens, but not always. Like some people don't, but generally that is a way to go. That'll happen.
Yeah, so if we have a recipient's blood at immunology and they get into a car accident and they have a transfusion, they're going to have to re-give immunology their blood because they might have more sensitizing agents now. So we need the most recent to make sure that there's nothing that's going to react with our donor,
Oh,
right?
for sure. And we like to have to say, okay, we want the a transfusion to, have had maybe like 2 weeks, but some people are getting transfused multiply, like continuously, and they're on a lung list or something like that. So we can't help that. Like they're gonna probably develop more sensitization, and some people like just go through the roof. Like suddenly they'll just develop all sorts of antibodies.
And so, sorry, sensitization, I don't sure I totally understand how it works. So you have like, it'd be your body's reaction to the donor.
Well, I mean, it's usually previous sensitization, which sensitization means you have been given maybe blood products, maybe a transfusion before. And so you have had your immune system has seen other person's antigens. So, or previous transplant, or as Bobby mentioned, a pregnancy can be a sensitizing event. And some people can get very sensitized to this, to the point where, so we give this a percent scale. So we give it, it's your up to 100%. And if you're 100%, it's not good. So we give it 100, we could give it 100% sensitization. And it just means that some people just react very, very efficiently. Their immune systems react to other people's antigens. And so this is what makes that's our immune system isn't really trying to make our immune system hard to transplant, but it just reacts to other antigens. And that is the most, as I mentioned, the most polygenic, like it's just, there's just so many antigens in that area of your genome that if you're exposed to, your immune system will react to it.
So that's why, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
That's why we have that national sharing agreement for kidneys. So these are people who are 95% and higher.
Exactly.
So their likelihood of finding a match is very low. And we have 2 kidneys. So one kidney stays here. We try to find a match here in BC. And the other one, we're going to try to match to these people who are highly sensitized. We're going to have a very difficult time finding a match.
Yeah, exactly. And 95 is not that bad, because you can get like 99 or 100%. Then they're really bad. Like there are people that are pretty much, I've looked at their files and they're untransplantable.
Wow. And that's because of their own individual immunity or antigens that they
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Huh. And then you mentioned before, like, so if someone had a transplant before, then their body might build up other antigens that make it more difficult for a future transplant.
For sure.
Okay.
Definitely. Although, I mean, if they're given a transplant, so they're going to be put on immunosuppression. So it might, sequel that in a way. So sometimes they don't develop as much antibodies, but the things that do is the transfusions actually that are the worst.
The blood transfusions.
Blood transfusions.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting. Well, gang, does anyone have? We got some time for questions. You guys okay for some questions now?
Yeah.
Sure.
All right, we got Harry.
So if I'm going to get a transplant, like what kind of tests would you run to figure out like what kind of transplant I'm getting, what organ I should be using, and how you can figure out if I'm compatible with that kind of lung.
So for yourself, like how long would it take? It takes a few days, actually. Yeah. It's not a rapid turnaround here.
How would you find out like what if my lung is compatible with that person's lung? Like if we can do the transplant. What kind of test do you run?
It's actually a different test. So I mean, we always do the genetic DNA testing, but for the most part, for recipients, we do antibody testing. That's actually the most important part. So we look to see if they've been sensitized to maybe some other blood products. And if you haven't been, you shouldn't have any other antibodies.
So that you check the antibodies of the recipient to make sure that they won't reject this organ. Is that
exactly?
okay?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you know, like kind of like the percentages of like how often does it like not end up working? Because like I can't imagine it would always end up like matching perfectly. Like someone would get like a transplant and then like a week later it just stops working.
I guess the success rate of the transplants and it.
Usually it's pretty good. Like, well, because we take a lot of precautions. So most of the time it's pretty good.
Yeah,
yeah.
We're all doing our due diligence. So part of my job is to look at the donor's organ function through blood work, through CTs. So I'm really looking at the donor to make sure those organs are viable for transplant. And then Dr. Lenka is doing like the antibody to make sure that they're matched in that regard as well.
Yeah, and the one video, the first video you showed us, Bobby, what they say, 150 people, as far as one can be involved in one donation or organ donation. It's like, wow, a lot of different wheels moving.
It's all about communication.
I was going to say there's more than 700 people waiting on the list. So if there isn't a match with, that, like Bobby was going through that list of, this matching the most critical need, who's been waiting the longest. But I mean, and you guys, Bobby and Lenka would be able to speak more, but there are many people waiting. So if there isn't a match, like they'll go through that list till they find the right person for the organ. So I don't know, Bobby, how often it happens though that, there might be a viable organ that you aren't able to find a recipient for. Does it happen? Or how often does it happen?
I mean, that's like, we're trying to make the most of these gifts. Sometimes it depends on the donor, right? Some people are so sick that they're willing to take a bigger risk. So somebody who's maybe lived a harder life, so they're willing to take a bigger risk on an organ, versus somebody who's maybe not so sick, and so they're willing to pass and wait for somebody who's maybe not lived so risky. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Go ahead.
You have to actually remember that, if you actually sign up to be a donor, potential donor, your chances of actually dying in a certain way that allows you to be a donor is less than 1%.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you were talking about how like the blood transfusions are like some of the like riskier ones. I was just wondering why they have such a small success rate.
Why they what?
Like blood transfusions, they have like a lower like success rate than like livers and like kidneys and stuff like that. So I was just wondering why that was.
Why blood transfusions have a lower success rate or than some other?
Because we do have patients that are waiting for an organ, and they're on things like, they're called ECMO. So something like they need lung assist devices or heart assist devices, and so they're given multiple transfusions, which in the end gives their immune system something to react to, which makes them harder to transplant later on, which is a frustration for us. And I hope that makes sense.
Yes. So when someone is, do some people just react to the blood transfusion themselves, or is the problem with the blood transfusion is it allows the people to build up those antigens that make it so they can't be successful organ recipients?
Yeah, they can become very sensitized, meaning that they develop these antibodies that then make actually tell me to say, no, you should not give that organ to somebody.
Interesting.
I had a question for, I think probably Bobby would be able to answer this, is how do I know that I'm actually a registered donor? Because I think I've registered, but is there a way that I can check that?
Yeah, so you can just go to our website and you can either log your own. Actually, Tina, you'd probably be better to explain this.
So yeah, in BC, you have to be actually 19 years old to register yourself. Your parents can otherwise register you, but nonetheless, you can go to our website and you can look up using your personal health number, so the number that's on your care card, and you can look up, you just put it in and it'll tell you if you've already registered. It'll say actually even when you registered. And if you haven't registered, then it'll pop up with the form to fill out, and then you can fill it out and register. And like I said, I think, I don't know if any of you are over 19, but 19 or over, but your parents, you have to have the permission from your parents, so they can do it for you, or they can be with you, or if you're going to do it online.
And like when I go see a family, even if they're registered, yes, I still go through and describe the whole process, because they may have registered, yes, but it wasn't an informed decision. They didn't know exactly all the ins and outs that it takes for organ donation to happen. So at the end, they may say, my loved one really didn't know that they had to stay on a ventilator for another 2 days, and they wouldn't have wanted that, regardless that they signed up to be an organ donor or not. So it's a wish, and it's good to have those conversations with family and let them know how you feel, because at the end, it's the family that will decide whether we move forward or not. And an interesting story. So because of where I work, I've had this conversation with my family many times, and they've all said, oh yes, we want to be an organ donor, except for our eyes. We don't want our eyes taken. Okay, well then a few years later, I developed this issue with my eye and got put on the wait list and ended up needing a cornea transplant. And so while I was waiting on the wait list, all my family started sending me pictures because they re-registered and changed their registration to include eye donation.
Cool. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead, Sadie.
How frequently is it that like someone will get like, how much trauma do you have to go through for your like lungs and like other organs to not be able to be donated?
So that's a good question, because like some of our donors are in like motor vehicle accidents. So with motor vehicle accidents, we're gonna put them through a CT scanner, and the CT scanner will be able to let us know whether there's a lot of damage to which organs. Also, it'll let us know if there's like any nodules in the lungs or cysts growing anywhere. So it depends really on what kind of accident and how much trauma there is. But that's part of my job, is to really take a good look at those organs and see how they're functioning and whether they're viable for transplant or not.
How many so we saved, what was it, 480 lives in 2019. How many people are on lists that need organs that, for whatever reason, there's not organs for them? Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, we're saving all of these people, but if we had more people being organ donors, how many more people could we have saved, or could still be could be around?
Yeah. Tina, do you remember like 2019, like how many people passed waiting for a donor and how
Okay. So I don't have the numbers, but it's between 20 and 30 a year who die waiting for a transplant. I think that if you look at our wait list, you would see there's 787 or 750, something like that, number of people waiting. The majority of them, like probably 600 plus, are people waiting for kidney transplants. And those folks are, the reason there's so many is because there's basically an alternative therapy that people can be on dialysis for some time while they're waiting for a transplant. Whereas, you know, sure, there's ways for someone who is waiting for lungs or heart to extend their life, but you know, unfortunately, there's only so long that someone can be waiting for a lung or heart transplant. So, so that's why, you know, people do pass away waiting for transplant. And unfortunately too, the other component is we say there's 700 people waiting for a transplant. There are others who are become too sick to stay on the wait list. You know, they actually aren't going to be healthy enough to receive a transplant, even if one were to become available. So, so that number changes, and it's not just, you know, that people, they don't, the number that I told you, 20 to 30 people, that's people who die while waiting. There may be others who are actually removed from the wait list, and I don't have that number or track that number, who then pass away, but they're not technically on the wait list. So it's kind of, it's hard to track specifically some of those numbers. So that's why we're always, you know, if you want to talk to your friends and family and others, we're always encouraging people to register as donors and to think about donation, because the need is so great. There's so many people.
Question. Yeah, go ahead, Grace.
Yeah, I was just wondering, because I forgot who said it, but earlier someone said from a different species at one point. So do they ever like use animal parts in people? Yeah.
Yeah. Question was just using organs from other animals in humans. I know that my grandma had a pig valve in her heart.
Well, I mean, this was tried a long time ago, and it just goes to the point of immunology, which basically is the fact that other species are going to be far more different from your immune system, than another human. So you tend to react to them much more. And I mean, this is something, you know, they're trying to, and there is obviously work around this. People are trying to work on this, because that would be, you know, I mean, like if we could get, you know, heart from a pig, that would work. I mean, but our immune systems just tend to react to them far more aggressively.
I guess how common is it, like you mentioned that pancreas, some people that are severe diabetics might have a pancreas transplant. At what point is it that someone needs that transplant? Is it?
We don't do very many pancreas transplants, pretty much simply because there are other methods of treating the patient through insulin and other things like that. So that's generally, I think, the main reason. But I mean, we do a couple a year, but not very many. Bobby, do you agree?
Yeah, I think we only do 1 or 2 pancreas a year. We do more islet cells than anything.
Yeah, islets, yeah. But they don't last very long. They tend to last only about a year.
What are islet cells? I meant to ask. I'm not too sure what that. What are islet?
So they're the cells that produce the, you know, the ability for your blood to deal with glucose, like sugar.
Okay, and they're in our, and these are cells that are in our blood.
They're in the pancreas, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, but they don't tend to, if you just isolate them from a pancreas, the way they get infused is through the liver portal, and then they just don't survive very long. They're kind of sensitive cells.
Oh, yeah, question, go ahead, Grace.
Are brain transplants a thing?
Brain, did you say?
Said she's like, our brain transplant's a thing.
It's actually not the first time I've been asked that. No, I think like that's where your personality, who you are is, and so that's not something that I think anybody wants to touch. And most of our donors are brain dead, so we're just taking the rest of the organs because they've had some sort of brain injury and their brain is no longer perfusing blood or functioning.
Any other questions, gang? I don't think we don't have any more questions, but Sadie's gonna thank you here.
On behalf of the Academy of Inquiry and Adventure Okanagan, we would just like to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules and coming to teach us about organ donation. Super cool. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, you guys.
Sure. Very welcome.
No, we really appreciate the time out of your day, like Sadie said, and thank you so much, Tina, for putting this all together for us. And it really kind of humanizes, this part of genetics, and certainly an afternoon we won't be forgetting.
Thanks. So glad it worked out.
Yeah, same.
Enjoy your last day of class, guys.
Thank you. Also, one last question. I have recorded this. Are people okay if I put this on our class Facebook?
I'm fine.
I'm fine.
Okay. Cool.
All good.
But thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Okay, bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.